Hello, everybody. My name is Eva Jarošová, and today I'd like to guide you through the plague epidemics in history with respect to Bohemia, where I'm from, and Central Europe. So, speaking about the plague, what is it exactly? Well, plague is an infectious disease caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Here we have it under the microscope. The name comes from Swiss-French doctor Alexander Yersin, who discovered this gram-negative bacteria during Hong Kong plague in 1894. And contrary to popular belief, the natural reservoir of these bacteria are not rats, but fleas. Here we have oriental rat flea, and its digestive tract, very primitive stomach that can be full of Yersinias. And the bacteria are living there and multiply there. And as they multiply, they basically cause the flea to be hungry because the stomach is full of bacteria, but there's no space for food. And so the flea is hungry, it bites even more, and with each single bite, the flea needs to empty part of the stomach to the wound. So what basically happens is that the flea is vomiting part of the bacteria into the wound. And this is the transmission through the skin barrier. This is the transmission of the disease. Rats, however, are probably the very key impact. Rats are the vector in spreading plague. And if we are having this unholy trinity, such as the bacteria, the flea, and the rat, they all together create perfect condition for spreading the disease. Why? Because rats, Rattus rattus, or in English roof rat, is a kind of animal that has a very special lifestyle. This animal lives very close to people, basically with people in their homes, in the attics, on the roof. That's why it is called a roof rat. Transmission of the disease, we already said it through the skin barrier, like bites or small wounds. In case of pneumonic plague, droplet infection, also body fluids play important role, etc. Right now I mentioned a pneumonic plague, so actually how many plague is there? No matter of which one, bubonic, pneumonic, or septicemic, all of them are demonstrated with flu-like symptoms. People have fever, headache, nausea, red splotches, etc. When we are talking about the bubonic plague, which is the most common one, then the infection is in lymph nodes. And these lymph nodes are swollen. They are big as an egg, and they are very painful to touch. These swollen lymph nodes are called buboes, from Latin bubo. And they can break open. And they can break open into the body, and in that case, usually septicemic form of plague follows, and the person is lost. Or these buboes can break open outside of the body, which is what is exactly this physician is trying to do, to open it. And if this opening was successful, then the victim in medieval time or in early modern period had some hope for surviving. So bubonic plague is not 100% lethal. It could be survived. Unlike the pneumonic plague, which can be primary or secondary, it depends. Primary, the infection is by droplets. Secondary, if you are having bacteria in your bloodstream and the bloodstream transmit them to your lungs. In any case, infection is in the lungs. The patients are usually short in breath, and they very soon died of respiratory failure. In medieval time, pneumonic plague was lethal. as well as the septicemic form. Septicemic form means that the highest concentration of bacteria is in your bloodstream, and the bloodstream is transmitting them to other organs. In medieval time, lethal. So right now, you probably ask, what is the sufficient treatment? Sufficient treatments are antibiotics. Yersinia pestis is very sensitive to streptomycin or tetracycline, for instance. But still, even with the pneumonic and septicemic plague, it's very important to take the antibiotics very soon after showing the first symptoms, because normally we are having records of people who were dead within 36 hours from showing the first symptoms of pneumonic plague. So how actually plague emerged? What is it? So plague is formally a zoonosis, that's disease in animals. It was somehow transmitted to humans, and we know of the first recordings are from the Bible, where we have Book of Exodus, when we have 10 plagues of Egypt. Not all of these 10 plagues are plagues in literal way. They are things like turning water to blood or frogs, but also the 5th plague of Egypt is pestilence of livestock, and the 6th one is boils. Then we know of some plagues from antiquity, like in Athens during the time of Pericles. Pericles is said to died of the plague. And also Anno Domini, the plague during the lifetime of Medicine Galen. All these plagues are just said to be plagues, but we cannot be 100% sure, because plague was very easily mistaken for some other diseases, some usually with anthrax or with variola. So the first one we are really certain that we are talking about plague was a plague during the time of Byzantine Emperor Justinian I in 6th century. This plague is documented thanks to Procopius of Caesarea, who was a chronicler and historian to the court of Justinian I, and according to his recordings, we are able to distinguish that this was really epidemic of the bubonic plague. WHO also listed this plague as to be the first wave of plague worldwide. The second wave was the Black Death. The Black Death was an epidemic of bubonic plague that reached Europe between the years 348 to 1351, approximately. And it all started here at the Crimean Peninsula. Here we have a region of Asia where actually plague is endemic disease. So it was just about a question of a time when this happened. And here in Crimea, we are having a city of Kaffa or Feodosia today that was under siege in 1346, and plague outbreak happened there. And because of a maritime route, the disease was transferred to Europe. Firstly, here through Constantinople to the first Italian trade ports of Venezia and Genoa, and from these spots by maritime route to the rest of Europe, and also by the terrestrial route. The Black Death was a very harsh phenomena. At least a third of all the people in the world died then, said Jean-François Sartre, the French chronicler. And we are not allowed to say the specific number, but the real estimation is really like from 40 to 60% of all European population, just 25 million of people died. Even though the regions were not affected equally. We are having a region such as Portugal, for instance, when we talk about 90% of population lost. But on the other hand, there are a region such as Bohemia, where we are not encountering a plague by that time. In 1348, which is the year that the Black Death is stroking Europe, Charles IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, is opening a university in Prague. And to open a university in medieval time, that means a great fluctuation of people, and it's certainly something you wouldn't do in a turmoil of the epidemic. Anyway, after the year 1348, the disease got viral character, and we are experiencing periodically repeated outbreaks of more local character. But as you look at these dates, that these are just dates when we are talking about plague in Bohemia, in just one region in Europe. And if you look at these days, it's it's just outbreak after outbreak in 10 years. Like almost each generation experience at least one wave of the plague. What were the consequences, especially of the Black Death? I think the decline of economy is plain enough. Slump in trade, reduction of land under cultivation because suddenly you are short of people. But the other consequence that I feel even more important is a crisis of society, because we are seeing decline of whole social stratas. All the social standards, morals, and spiritual life was suddenly on loss, because really, like, whole social stratas, usually the doctors and the clergy, so the elites, died off, and suddenly there was no one to, well, guard the morals, let's say. And so we are seeing a rise of violence, anti-Semitism, and the change in society was really, really high, huge, and for a very long time. On the other hand, to be also a positive, we are also experiencing higher natality and also increase of wedding rates. After the epidemic, it is said that in Vienna, 1680, okay, that's early modern period, but still we have recordings of 95 weddings conducted in one day once the epidemic was over. And what we also are experiencing is a line probable link to macabre art. Macabre art is super interesting phenomena, and I would love to tell you about it more and more, but unfortunately we don't have a time, so let's hope that maybe sometimes in some next Central European virtual talk. Just right now, I'd like to introduce you the theme of macabre art, culture of death and dying, that was suddenly on a rise in Europe. It's a very special phenomena that can be explained in a simple ways, but we see tendencies towards death and dying even before the Great Plague. But now the art became really macabre. We see a preoccupation with death and afterlife, and that imprinted in visual art as well as in literature. In visual art and literature, a combination is so-called ars moriendi, or the art of dying well. And in visual arts, we meet depictions of death as a corpse. The corpse is a human body in decomposing. So with remains of flesh and hair with symbols of decay, such as snakes and frogs. Until that, the death was symbolized by a skeleton, just a pure skeleton, pure bones, nothing horrible. Right now, this change, and we are having death as a corpse. We are also having a transient form of tombstone, which is the same thing, basically. You have a representation, an effigy of the deceased one in the form of decomposing. Again, someone really commissioned this to be his or her memorial. We are also meeting genres of dance of death, dance of the dead, or triumphs of death, with probably the most popular one, the Brechel ones. And see, this is 1562, so 200 years later, but still very impressive. And that's what is the most interesting thing about this culture. This culture is overlapping, and the tendencies of macabre art we traced to the next centuries and centuries, and basically actually it continues to nowadays. See, Iron Maiden. Okay, but back to plague. What was it? How to deal with it? For people, it was usually God's punishment, or that one theory said that it's bad winds, like bad winds full of bacteria and bad fluids. Also, there was influence of astrological phenomena such as comets or bad position of planets, especially Saturn. Other reason was bad food. According to humoral theory, when your body liquids were not in balance, it can cost you a sickness. And of course, conspirational theories that are like a red link through the history. For our predecessors, plague was also plot of witches or plot of the Jews that wanted to kill the Christians by charms or by poisoning the water wells. And to poison a water well was a really serious crime. So the Jews were undergoing a very harsh time, and we see the first pogroms, first genocide on Jews by that time. The same thing from the same crime, poisoning the water wells, were also accused the doctors. They were accused of spreading the plague, especially because they were using, for disinfection, they were using hydrated lime, which is white powder. And when people saw the doctors spreading white powder, they thought that it's actually the plague, and the doctors are doing it just to have more money out of curing the plague. And that's, I have one recording from early modern period Moravia when there was a doctor and he ended up in jail because of that. And this continued up to 19th century when there was an epidemic of cholera in Slovakia, and there used to be sanitary commissions that were coming from city to city, and they were disinfecting the water wells. And people thought that they are just putting there the white powder is actually the poison, and people were refusing to drink the water from these water wells, and so even more of them died because they just didn't believe the doctors are doing their best. And they were really doing. As early as 1348, we see the first medicinal book that were describing the disease, the plague, the potential prophylaxis and treatment. These books, I put you there one Czech book, Medicinal and Very Useful Care Against Sickness of Plague. In all these books, you could find hygienic, dietetic, and preventive advices, like to change the place. If you remember Decameron, it's all about the change the place. To not agglomerate with other people, especially in pubs or in spas. To avoid sick people at any cost. Ventilation only in the morning or evening, because during the noon we are having the bad winds. Moderation in life, especially in food, in drink, in sexual life. Washing clothes regularly, preferably in lye, that was one of the effective. Treatment of plague was very limited, because until the antibiotics, there wasn't a lot you could do. You could just separate the sick from the healthy one, use a disinfection of hands, mouth, or surfaces by vinegar, hydrated lime, open fire. Also disinfection of the air, so fumigation of room. When people got sick, the doctors were prescribing purgatives, like bloodletting, what they were usually using for almost everything, laxative, theriac or pilula pestilentiasis, pills against the plague, herbs for sweating, poppy syrup for sleeping, and capping therapy for buboes, because buboes were very hard. So that was the way how to make them softer, to open them. Also, medicinal authority of the time, Paracelsus was advising dried frogs or powder from the dried frogs to put on the buboes, or to put the butt of a plug hen to the buboes. Usage of urea and stuff like this, which are a little bit bizarre. Also, the state has got its own response to plague. Firstly, we are encountering city ordinances, then laws, patents, and infections orders, like something which is imposed from the above, from the highest levels. When the epidemic outbreak was, state was imposing strict lockdowns, border closings, port closings, quarantine in a original sense of that word, so 40 days of isolation. Also, economic restrictions such as closing the markets, closing pubs, public spaces, spas, even school. On the other hand, we also are meeting some economic stimulations, like taxes were postponed, for instance. State was also imposing sanitary norms and issuing health passports. Health passports should be like a passports that are granting the holder that he or she is coming from a place where there is no plague or no disease. So it should be like fine. Unfortunately, these health passports were there was a black market with them. So this is how the plague was spreading, because someone's having a health passport but actually was coming from infected city. Also, usually the ruler and his or her court were not following the restriction, border closing, nor quarantine. So when Emperor Leopold was flooding Vienna in 1679 with all his court, so with his court, the plague was spreading all along the country. We, in this time, are also meeting development and building of hospitals outside of the city walls. Usually, they were run by religious orders. People from these orders were living there, and the doctors were just coming in and coming out. Like in Prague, here in Prague, we used to have plague Lazaretto with 25 of Jesuits, and they all died there, taking care of the sick people. And when the next wave came, the Jesuits opened another one and repeat it all. After this, the only other possibility was just to pray. So we are meeting something which is called a spiritual apothecy. Prayers, open air sermons, open air because even the churches were closed, so people could not agglomerate in like closed areas. Also processions, very infamous were flagellant groups in medieval time that were actually spreading the plague. And we are also having plague patrons, San Roch, San Rosalia, San Sebastian, and after the Tridentine time, also Francis Xavier or Charles Borromeo. Here we have St. Roch pointing on his bubo. And in Central Europe, we are having a special phenomena of so-called plague columns that are actually a special acts of devotion. It's a devotional piece, kind of offering to God to spare the city from plague, or as a mean of thankfulness for plague is over. First plague column in Central Europe was erected in Vienna, 1679. This is it. And you can still find it there. And if you are familiar with Central Europe, or if you go to Central Europe, you probably notice that this is the average setting of a Central European city when you are having a town square, and in the middle of town square, you can have a devotional column. And by this, we entered the early modern and modern period where plague is suddenly no more. and we don't know why. And I know that this is the wrong ending. We shouldn't be ending with unanswered question, but this is how it is, unfortunately. Plague in Europe is no more, even though there was a third wave in East Asia that also reached an American continent quite a bit. But from the time in Europe, we cannot find a plague wave. We don't know why. There are a lot of theories. The probable explanation is that it's just a combination of a lot of factors, such as acquired immunity, especially in pets and animals that are living very close to people, and also something which is called rat control. What is it? I was talking about the roof rat that used to be Europeanish. It was the rat that was living very close to people, with people on their roofs, basically. And then in the 16th, the 17th, and 18th century, we are meeting a Norway rat, which is, don't be mistaken by the name, actually a North American rat. And because of the trade, a Norway rat was introduced to Europe, and Norway rat is a bigger and stronger. So the Norway rat like battled out the roof rat from Europe. Norway rats got a different lifestyle from a roof rat. Norway rat does not live close to people. It lives close to people, but not in their houses. Norway rat prefers humid climate, such as canalization and such stuff. So it's not living directly with humans. And also, from some reason, Norway rat is not prone to infectious disease. So that could be one of the explanation, and it could be actually even explanation why also probably there was an outbreak of plague even at the American continent, because right now what you can find in American continent is the roof rat. So that was just one theory, and I'm pretty sure you can come up with more theories if you would like to do so. I also put there a selected bibliography, very short selected bibliography, for those of you who are reading English, for those of you who are reading German or French or even Czech. And if you are having more questions, then I'll be more than happy to answer them if it's gonna be in my limits, within my limits. That's all from me. I thank you very much for your attention. It was my pleasure, and I wish you a great day.